All right, welcome in everybody. I hope all is well wherever you guys are in the world. I wanted to take a moment here and bring Brian in because there has been a lot of talk recently, at least in the circles that I follow, about the poles shifting. And then there's also this talk of the age of Aquarius and the awakening that we're in right now. And so I thought it'd be a good time to bring Brian in and talk about some of these things, especially where Christ consciousness fits into this, especially in regard to this awakening. So I want to say hello to Carla. I see you here, and Flora. Flora, yep. Hello, you guys, welcome. I will be in the background. I'm going to be intuitively pulling some things up as Brian is speaking, and things that he may mention. I want to bring in some. I'll put some things on the screen for everybody to kind of see and match what he might be talking about. So, Brian, if you're ready, I'm going to go ahead and give the floor to you and let you take over from here.
All right. So welcome in everybody, Grand Rising Collective. Yes, this is a very important topic whenever it comes to not only the pole shift, but the age of Aquarius, of course, and with where we're at in the timeline, with the world's current events, with everything happening. And this is a huge topic. There is a lot to discuss on the topic of Christ consciousness. And this just happens to be one of my favorite absolute topics to discuss for obvious reasons. And right now is probably a very pivotal time and a very apt time to be having this discussion. And I want to begin this conversation by addressing the elephant in the room with what is going on the world stage and in the world events right now. I go live all of the time on multiple channels, and I speak to thousands of people. And one of the most common things that I see in the comments is the world just seems like it is getting darker and darker, that everything just seems to be coming out of the woodworks. Everything from the congressional hearings on UAPs and the Diddy trial to these 3.5 million pages of a certain case that is high profile that was just uploaded to the public, that because of the constraints of this platform, I can't really go into details on that right now. But Casey and I are going to be covering that in the members section. Is that correct, Casey? I don't remember exactly the time at the moment.
Yes, that's going to be tomorrow for the Phoenix Frequencies members. That's going to be tomorrow. And then also on your Patreon. Brian has a Patreon, so you can go to Magi Rising. Am I saying that right? I always ask you. Magi?
I say Magi. That was
Magi.
how it was pronounced as given by Spirit. But
Got
Magi, either one works.
I'll put your. There we go. That's it. But if you're a Phoenix Frequency member, if you go to your announcements page, we're going to be able to talk freely on these platforms where we can't do that here. So if you guys want to check that out, we'll see you over there tomorrow at 1 p.m. Eastern, 12 p.m. Central.
Thank you. So the main reason that I want to start this conversation of Christ consciousness on this topic is because this is one of the primary challenges that we're all facing right now, is either burying our head in the sand and pretending that these things aren't happening, or trying to manage our energetic state, our emotional state, in light of what has been revealed. And some of this information, again, without giving any details or going too far here, is some of the most horrific things imaginable, beyond imagination. And I have recently come to the realization and understanding that this information may not have accidentally come to light. It might not have been the result of somebody slipping up and getting caught, that perhaps this is part of a bigger picture, and this release of this information was planned and carefully orchestrated using the timing of astrology to elicit a specific reaction in the collective, to shift our energy and focus, and bind us to the old systems through fear, through anger, through rage and hatred, and all of the negative, low vibrational emotions that come up whenever this information comes to light. So, again, we'll be talking about that later tomorrow. But for now, this is relevant to the conversation of Christ consciousness, in that people tend to feel like the world is getting darker as all of these things are being revealed. Like, it seems there is a tremendous increase of wickedness in the world. I don't believe that is the actual truth. I think it is actually quite the opposite. With Pluto, the ruler of death, rebirth, and transformation, and perhaps as if not more importantly, the shadow transiting through the sign of Aquarius right now, the humanitarian, representing the collective as a whole. We are experiencing an increase in light in the world, unlike anything we've ever seen before. And we've not seen anything yet. This has only just begun. And this increase in light is illuminating the recesses of the shadow, of the darkness, that which has been lurking in the shadows, operating behind the scenes, in some cases for thousands of years, without our awareness, without being, aware that these things are occurring. And so this increase in light is illuminating that and bringing it to our attention for the first time, so it can feel and seem like there's this increase in evil and wickedness and these terrible things, like it's just all happening at once. That is because the waters of truth are beginning to be dumped out upon the population and the earth as part of the shift into the age of Aquarius. And of course, Christ consciousness comes into play here. I'll come full circle with this eventually, so you'll understand what I mean by that. My favorite story of the entire synoptic gospels, whenever I am either talking about what I consider to be the true teachings of Jesus, or I'm talking about Christ consciousness or the way reality functions, no matter what it is, my absolute favorite story from the synoptic gospels within the New Testament occurs immediately after Jesus feeds the multitudes on the beach. And as soon as he's done, he, sends his disciples away on a boat out into the sea, and basically says, I'll meet up with you guys later. I got to go take care of some things. I got to go meet with the Father. And so the disciples get on this boat and they go out to the sea, and the wind starts kicking up. The waves start tossing their little boat to and fro, right? And they all start losing their minds. It's terrifying. And in the middle of all of this, Jesus strolls up, cools the cucumber on the surface of the water. And this frightens them, right? We've never seen anybody walk on water before. And Peter calls out and says, Lord, if that is truly you, call to me and I'll come to you. And of course he did. And then Peter steps out of the boat onto the water and takes a few steps. And then the wind kicks up again. The waves rage and doubt enters Peter's mind. The second doubt enters his mind, bloosh, Peter goes into the water. And Jesus reaches down and saves him and says, O ye of little faith, why did you doubt? And had to pull him up and save him, right? This story to me is a perfect illustration of the difference between what most mean by spiritual awakening versus Christ consciousness. And I do believe there's a marked difference between the two. You can be awakened to what's going on around you and awakened to energy and the way that the world really works without that true expansion of consciousness that raise your vibration to the point that you begin to see through the fabric of reality and the way that we think, the laws of physics and everything functions in that reality. And for Jesus, that was blatantly obvious, right? He broke the 2 loaves of bread and fed 2,000 people. He walked on water. He healed the sick and the lame and all of the miracles that he did. This one story also teaches a very powerful lesson about the power of the mind and about how all of these miracles that occurred all throughout the Synoptic Gospels were the result of mind organizing energy into matter, something that I consider to be a part of the original teachings of Jesus, especially to his closest disciples and those that were open and ready for such a deep level of instruction. So before we can really have too much of an in-depth discussion about what Christ consciousness is and what all that entails and how that fits into this grand scheme of things, I think it's important that we're all talking about the same thing and that we're on the same page. So I will give you a few examples pulled from the Synoptic Gospels that I think highlight the true picture of what Christ consciousness really is. This story of Peter walking on water perfectly illustrates Christ consciousness and the power of the mind, and why it is so important to watch over the gates of our mind, to become the careful gardener in the garden of our mind, because one little weed that is planted in there can grow and overtake the good crops, right, from bearing fruit. And so it is important as those seeds fall to pluck them up at the root and replace them with the thoughts of what we actually want to cultivate in the garden of our mind. That has probably never been more relevant or more important than it is in the time in which we live right now. As the magnetic polar reversal gets underway, as the magnetic field begins to weaken and the veil thins and the light increases in the world, illuminating the darkness, revealing to us things that we had no idea about, that we might not be emotionally prepared to see and to accept as reality. Those things can easily cause a seed of doubt to enter the mind, a seed of fear. And each one of those is capable of dropping us beneath the surface of the sea, so to speak, just like what happened with Peter when he attempted to walk on water. This is why I chose to start here, because we're dealing with this now in real time. But to further illustrate the idea of Christ consciousness within the Synoptic Gospels, Jesus, to me, his central core truth that he tried to get the world to see is likened to the law of one whenever he talks about the kingdom of God. And ultimately, I think what that entails is dissolving the delusion of separateness, this belief that I am separate, I am an island unto myself, that I am separate from you, and I am separate from my neighbor, and I am separate from my dog, Brittany, and from the air that I breathe and the grass that I walk on. Whenever a soul first incarnates into matter, as the body takes its first breath of life, the soul enters into the body and is encased in matter. And as the soul enters into the third density, it crosses the barrier of the veil, the magnetosphere. And then we are born in almost every case with a very profound amnesia where we do not have the full recollection of our past lives, of timelines, of this innate knowing of the law of one, that all life is sacred and holy, that there's one vast sea of energetic consciousness that animates all life, and the totality of that has been called God, right? So I believe Jesus expanded his consciousness to the point that he was able to pierce the veil. This delusion of separateness dissolved, and he was able to recognize that inner knowing of oneness, not just an intellectual belief or understanding that all life is connected, such as what I'm talking now, but an experiential knowing of a feeling and a true connection with all life. And that's why several times throughout the Synoptic Gospels, Jesus said something, and this is paraphrasing, I'm not quoting scripture word for word, but something along the lines that I am in the Father, and the Father is in me, and I am in you. Probably the best story or parable that illustrates this point is whenever he's talking to his disciples, and he says, get away from me, you never knew me. You see me naked and you did not clothe me. You see me hungry and you did not feed me. And the disciples, of course, were absolutely beside themselves. When, Lord, when did we do these terrible things to you? And he said, I tell you the truth. As you do to the lowest amongst you, you do to me and unto the Father. Jesus, I do not believe, was speaking metaphorically there. He was trying to convey a deeper mystical understanding that we are all a part of God, the oneness of God. And that is the entire kernel of truth throughout the ministry, the kingdom of God. And this, of course, is relevant to each and every single one of us now, because Jesus himself referenced the end of the age in more than one occasion. And he talked about the birthing of the new age and the coming of the kingdom of God, and how we would know that the time was right, that these things were approaching. And he talked about earth changes occurring. And like in this period of time, I believe that we're in right now to the birth pains that a woman experiences leading up to childbirth. And that's the period of time that we're in right now. We're experiencing a contraction, right? Things seem to be getting more intense, more painful. Time seems to be speeding up. All of these things are coming to light, and it's overwhelming. It's a lot all at once. But just like in childbirth, the contractions start out relatively mild in comparison to what comes later. And then they grow in intensity, and they start coming closer and closer together up until the moment of crowning. In this case, when the new earth is birthed into existence. So where does Christ consciousness fit into all of this in the grand scheme of things? I believe that we all are collectively standing at a crossroads right now. And this crossroads is not something that we get to set out, that every single one of us must make a decision. We have to choose a path. You don't get to set it out. You don't get a rain check, and nobody gets to make this decision for you. Every single one of us must make this decision. Either we continue down the path of self-destruction, of greed and corruption and selfishness, believing in the root deception that we are separate from all other life, or we choose evolution. We choose to do the great work of self-transformation, facing ourselves in the mirror and excavating the contents of our shadow, facing our own darkness and healing, integrating those parts of ourself back into the whole so that we are whole again, right? Because it's hard to get there when we have rejected numerous parts of ourself and we sweep it under the rug and hide it away from the light of consciousness. Those parts have to be reclaimed. They have to be owned. So that is the path of evolution, of doing the hard work, accepting and owning responsibility for our previous actions and deciding enough is enough. It's time to change. It's time to evolve. And then we become part of the solution. And I think right now, with Pluto transiting through the sign of Aquarius, again, any major transit that impacts Pluto, or I'm sorry, Aquarius, impacts everybody because Aquarius represents the people. It is the sign of the humanitarian. And Pluto, again, represents death and rebirth, transformation, and the shadow, right? This is a very powerful transit that happens once about every 247 and a half years. And I encourage every single one of you guys not to take my word for this, but to do your own research and look and see what was happening in the world 247 years ago, and then what was happening before that, and then what was happening before that. Like clockwork, you will notice a pretty consistent pattern across the entire planet as far back as you want to look. This transit brings revolution to society. It manifests in one of two primary ways. On one hand, transformation to society through revolution, socio-politically. That's where we see things like monarchies being overthrown in favor of some form of democracy. Or 247 years ago, as an example, we decided to throw us a big old tea party in the Boston Harbor, and we fought a revolutionary war and penned the Declaration of Independence. We broke away from the global superpower of the time, the British Empire, and shifted the order of things. The power shifted, transformed powerfully through revolution. And at the same time, on the other side of the pond, the French Revolution was raging. All of this was under this transit of Pluto in Aquarius. But that's only one side of the coin, one way that this energy manifests. The other way is through transformation of society, through revolutions to our societal structures, such as the systems of control. Not only governments, but things like educational institutions, the church. Every major split of the Christian church, as an example, has occurred while Pluto was in Aquarius, from the split between Eastern and Western Orthodoxy to the founding of the Church of England and the beginning of the Protestant Revolution, and everything in between. It has all occurred under this very powerful transit. It's not just to the institutions. This happens at a individual level as well. But what's different about this time around is any time in the past, as far back as we have the capability to look, Pluto has went out of bounds to the north. And what that means, if you don't happen to be an astrology buff, out of bounds is a term that refers to the declination, either positive or negative, of a planet as it traverses our solar system. There is a narrow band, either north or south of the equator of the sun, where planets typically revolve. If a planet goes either above that traditional band or below it, then it is considered out of bounds. Whenever it operates within the confines of that band, the sun, as the ruler of our solar system and our entire system, is like the parent of our system, right? It makes the planets behave, so to speak. It modulates their energy and their impact. When a planet goes out of bounds, it's a lot like a teenager sneaking out of their bedroom window at midnight and going out for a night on the town. Mom or dad's not there to make sure that they're behaving the way that they should be, right? So energies tend to present themselves erratically and in different ways than what you would normally see. So that's what I mean by out of bounds. It's not rare or unusual to see a planet go out of bounds. That does happen. With this transit of Pluto through Aquarius, we've always seen it go out of bounds to the north, which tends to manifest itself as a restructuring of power, a consolidation of power from one system into another. And it usually consolidates the power. It concentrates it into greater forms. A good example of this, without going too far into it right now, is a year or so ago, the internet was awash with everyone discussing their thoughts on the fall of Rome, the Roman Empire. I don't believe the Roman Empire ever fully collapsed. I believe that it consolidated its power into organized religion. And that is exactly what I mean by a consolidation and a focusing of power. It went from ruling a vast region to essentially ruling the planet for almost 2,000 years through that consolidation. So that's the type of energy that we traditionally see when Pluto goes out of bounds to the north. This go around for the next 18 to 19 years, we are going to see Pluto go out of bounds to the south for the first time ever, as far as we can see, going back thousands of years, and even projecting into the future thousands of years. This appears to be a one-off event, though I don't think that it truly is. The energy is likely to manifest in the exact polar opposite way that we usually see, where the power structures shift. They transform, consolidate, and focus the power into fewer and fewer hands, creating more and more powerful individuals, albeit fewer. This go around, I think this entails the restructuring of power, in that it is from the top down to where the people take the power back. In truth, we don't really know because we've not seen it before. But for the next 9 years in particular, every autumn or every fall, if you will, for 3 months, we will see Pluto going out of bounds to the south. And this will result in shifts of the structure around us. Geopolitically, shifts of institutions. We might see the collapse of powerful institutions that have been in control for thousands of years. Things are going to start coming to light in a very powerful way. And it might seem like things are out of control right now with all of this information, with all of the disclosure. But we haven't begun to see anything yet. This is barely scratching the surface of things to come in the future. So the energy of Pluto and Aquarius is not only transforming society and redistributing power, it is also acting as a cosmic sorting hat, if you will, right now. Kind of like the sorting hat from the Harry Potter movies, where the hat goes on the head and it's either Gryffindor or Hufflepuff or Ravenclaw, whatever. That's part of, we are standing at a collective crossroads and everyone must decide right now. And I believe that Pluto, as the ruler of the shadow, it is encouraging each and every one of us right now to do the work, to look within, to confront and face our own darkness, and not to balk, not to run from it out of fear, but to embrace it, to give those things, those parts of ourselves that we have rejected, to give those things space, to give them the light, essentially, and give them expression. And then we can reintegrate those parts of ourselves. That is what Pluto is encouraging each and every single one of us to do right now. But those energies will not be imposed upon us, right? Because we have free will. So no matter who we're talking about, I don't think that these energies are going to come along and force your hand and force you into doing the shadow work, into working on yourself. But as the cosmic sorting hat and as initiating the completion of this grand cycle of time and birthing the new age of Aquarius and the new Earth, these energies are increasing the amount of energy, the amount of light in the world right now. And I, for one, do not believe that this tremendous wave of energy that is impacting us all right now, I don't believe that that energy is going to trigger a powerful, great awakening that will awaken all souls. Unfortunately, I believe that what this is a massive boost of energy. And I listened to a podcast with a mystic talking about this, and he gave the example of an airplane trying to take off on the runway. If you are going against the wind and there is a tremendous gust of wind, then the plane will just shoot up in elevation with practically no effort whatsoever, riding the wave of energy, essentially. That's if you take the path of the great work of self-transformation. Now, what happens if the plane is pointed the opposite direction and the wind is coming from behind it and there's a tremendous gust of wind? Well, it could go bad, right? It could crash and burn. And I think that that's ultimately what we are beginning to witness, is that there's this tremendous surge, this tremendous wave of energy, and it will not impose a choice or a decision. That is up to us to make. But what this energy does is it propels us down our path that we have selected. So if you are somebody who is naturally meditative and introspective and are doing the work on yourself and are trying to heal yourself and awaken fully and embody this energy of Christ consciousness, then you will soar to new heights, almost as if the universe is lifting you up. However, if you are somebody who's deeply rooted in selfishness and greed and ego and corruption, then you will get a tremendous boost in that direction as well. Because we are in this moment of the sorting, separating the wheat from the tares. And this moment is pivotal for that reason. So we have this growing dichotomy in the world right now, to where there seems to be an increase in darkness, right? There's an increase in light, and it is revealing all of these things to us. But the dichotomy is growing. There seems to be an increase in both going on in this world right now. And that will continue most likely as the contractions of the birthing pains of the new earth get closer and closer together up until the moment of crowning. And to bring all of this together, and where Christ consciousness comes into play with all of this and why this is so important, is because right now all of these things are happening around us in real time, and they're going to continue to happen. Disclosure will continue to happen. Things will be revealed that will be beyond shocking, that will seriously challenge your nervous system, your emotional state, and your ability to stay grounded and centered within yourself. The waves will rage, right? The wind is going to blow. And we need to be able to stay in that consciousness of being able to walk on the water, so to speak, as Peter was. And going back to, I think there's a reason why this is all being released now and being made readily available to the public, is an attempt to hijack the Great Awakening, to prevent souls from escaping this system, and experiencing the expansion of consciousness and raise in frequency vibration that co-occurs with the entrance of the age of Aquarius. Dolores Cannon, in her work, whenever she spoke about the new earth, she said that in order to make it to the free earth, to make that leap to the new earth, we have to let go of fear. And we have to be able to forgive not only everything that other people have done that we feel have wronged us, but we have to be able to forgive self, because those things bind us to the wheel of karma, to the third density, karmically, right? And if I can borrow from the work of another powerful individual, Edgar Cayce, when talking about the 12,000 year disaster cycle, he stated that this is not purely a physical cycle that occurs, like cogs or gears turning until a certain tooth is accomplished and then this mechanism is sprung. It's first and foremost a spiritual cycle, an energetic cycle, a karmic reset switch for when the world is thrown too far out of balance, and the universe must have balance. It's for when the scales of justice get tipped too far in one direction, and the universe must step in. And it co-occurs with the completion of great cycles of time at the end of the age and at the beginning of the next age. It again acts like a giant reset switch, because we can't carry the debts of the past, the burdens of the past, the karmas. We cannot carry all of those things with us into the new age, into the 1,000 years of peace that's been prophesied, into the new earth. They must be relinquished. And that's what Dolores Cannon was talking about when she said, let go of the fear and forgive. If somebody has wronged me, if they broke into my house and stole valuable possessions that took me 10 years to accumulate, and then, of course, I'm going to have an emotional reaction to that, right? If I allow that to shift my energy, and then I build a karmic attachment to this individual, and I refuse to let that go, then I say, no, we're not walking past this. You owe me, right? And so neither party is able to move forward, is able to move on, because that energetic karmic tie that you are enforcing, that I am enforcing, binds me to that wheel of karma and to the old system. And I think if you take a very careful consideration of biblical prophecy of the book of Revelation, not only does Revelation give a very accurate depiction of what a physical polar reversal of this planet would entail whenever it talks about a tremendous earthquake, unlike anything the world has ever seen, and the moon and stars appearing as if they are covered in blood, and the sky rolling up like a scroll and receding, and every island and mountain being removed from its places. Not only does it give us that, mirroring what Jesus says in Matthew chapter 26, but it also goes on to describe the trials of the awakened, essentially. That's not the verbiage that is given, right? They are referred to as the elect, the chosen, the 144,000. There's seemingly a few different groups or a few different references for the same group, either way. But it talks about how we will go through these things, not only the physical earth changes, but also the rise of a very tyrannical, technocratic police state, a one world government with a mark that everyone must take in order to buy, sell, or trade. And that is a topic all of its own, right? That's a huge topic. So I won't go too far into that right now. But there is a concept within biblical scripture, and this did not begin with Christianity. It owes its roots to Judaism, an understanding that most scripture is written to be understood on primarily three different levels, that it is meant to be taken at face value on one of those, that it tells stories to convey messages of morality, basically. And that is for everybody. That is for the general population at large, right? It is used to teach morality. Then there is a deeper level that is revealed to us through spirit and through wrestling with the word of God, essentially. And then there is a deeper mystical understanding for those who have eyes to see and ears to hear. And I think that is all throughout the biblical scriptures, whether you're talking beginning in the Torah all of the way up through the more recent New Testament. But as an example of this, a case could be made that the scroll and the opening of the seven seals, beginning in, I think, chapter 6 of Revelation, can be understood on a multitude of levels. There is, at the discovery of the scroll, the presentation of it, there is a weeping in heaven because none is found worthy to open the seals and read from the scroll. And then the Lamb appeared, almost as if they're talking about Jesus there. And then the seals, one by one, are opened, unlocked, and then the scroll can be read from. That could mean that Jesus was found worthy and set off this chain of prophetic events, initiating this timeline prophecy that basically began the entire process of the book of Revelation. Or at a deeper level, it could be understood that the scroll is the spine, the Sushumna, and the seven seals are the seven chakras that must be cleared, opened, and activated in order to experience that ascension to Christed consciousness. And I think that there is a perfect reason why that fits. Whenever it talks later on in the book of Revelation about this, after the seals, it talks about the judgments being rendered upon the earth, that again, these are not this is the reset switch of the cycle, right? The debts must be paid. So we have a balanced ledger to move forward with. Whenever those things are occurring, a point comes whenever God says, hold up a minute, go and seal my people with the name of God on their foreheads, and they are not to be touched during this period of time. And I think that an argument could be made that this is those who do the work, who truly experience Christed consciousness of full awakening. They have expanded their consciousness to the point that they are operating at or near the level of consciousness that Jesus experienced, which he did say, by the way, you will do these things and greater. And that's why they're sealed with the name of God on their foreheads. The 144,000 is almost always taken literally as 12,000 members from each of the 12 tribes. And that is entirely possible. I'm not here to say that that is right or wrong, but there is another understanding to be had there. 144,000 could very well refer to the opening and blooming of the crown chakra that has been opened and activated, initiating the activation of the light body of those who have been fully awakened. This ties every single bit of it together, from what Edgar Casey said to what Dolores Cannon said to the Book of Revelation and beyond. Dolores Cannon, if you read her work talking about the new earth, it almost sounds like that through this expansion of consciousness and raising of the vibration and letting go of the fear and the forgiveness and all that, that these people will just simply phase out and then will find themselves ascended to the fifth density with the new earth. What would that look like for those who stay behind in the third density in our current reality? It might look like certain people have just been snatched up, like they have phased out, right? Kind of like what it talks about with the rapture. I could very easily see it coming off that way. This is just my own personal theory, but what I believe and what I've been talking about for the last year is that the magnetosphere of our planet modulates consciousness. There is scientific evidence that proves that electromagnetic fields modulate consciousness, right? So as the magnetic reversal progresses and the field weakens, more and more of this wave of high vibrational energy makes it down to the ground and into our bodies. And because it is vibrating higher, it triggers our bodies to begin to vibrate higher. There will come a point when the field is practically non-existent before it pops up at opposite ends of the planet, and then the field repopulates. The field regains its full strength at that point. I think that is the moment where the new earth appears and separates from the old earth, the third density from the fifth density. And at that point, everyone will have made their decision. We will have picked our paths and we will be progressing down them. The field enables the shift in consciousness because it is no longer there acting as a Faraday cage to limit consciousness. And then we've progressed down our path. The field is regenerated and the Faraday cage is back. Consciousness is now modulated and the cosmic sorting hat does its job. You are placed where you belong by virtue of your frequency vibration. This, I think, is ultimately what the role of Christ consciousness in the new age is all about. This is its role within the cycle and the entrance of the age of Aquarius. Sorry, guys, I was just taking a minute here to look at the comments. I know a lot of you guys aren't as familiar with me, but whenever I start talking on things like this, in a lot of ways, I channel from either my higher self or from spirit. And whenever that happens, it's like I catch a hook of a line of thought, a train of thought, and then I just am completely oblivious to what's going on around me. So I normally try to pay close attention to the comments and have this a little bit more interactive. But whenever that happens, I usually am not able to. So I hope you guys will forgive me. I think this is a good time, Casey, for if anybody has any questions about anything that I've said, or if there are any parts that I did not cover well enough or that we need to spend a little bit more time on. Oh, thank you, my friend. I appreciate that. You're most welcome. Casey, I can't hear you if you were talking to me. Okay. So, you guys, does anybody have any questions for me or any specific topic within this huge umbrella that I'm trying to cover here that I need to spend a little bit more time on? Ascension. You're most welcome, Bernice. Thank you for being here and participating in this. I don't know how many of you guys were here or have watched the replay from the last time that Casey and I got together, but I focused almost exclusively on the 12,000 year cycle and the polar reversal and what that means in a little bit more depth and detail than what I skimmed over today. So if you have not seen that and you want more information on it, that is an excellent place to start. Griffin, I just now seen your comment. All of the universe is conscious because it has to do with the singularity. I agree 100%, my friend. I grew up religious but was spiritual, then it led me back to religion, which led me back to spirituality. That is one of my absolute biggest topics. And I think, for one, Casey and I should consider doing a live, particularly on the topic of spirituality and religion, primarily mainstream Christianity. I have so many people that wrestle with that because they came up within mainstream religious institutions where there is a lot of indoctrination, a lot of programming. I myself grew up the same way, and this is one of the absolute biggest things that I've ever wrestled with. It is the biggest thing, not one of, because I had this very profound spiritual experience 20 years ago, was shown past lives and shown a vision of the future of this cycle, and was told about karma and reincarnation and all of these things. And that's difficult to reconcile when you come from a mainstream Christian framework where those things are not only shunned, you're flat out told that those are tools of the devil, that they're demonic and evil and all of that that goes along with it. So
Absolutely. What would you say, Brian, are some of the misconceptions that collectively we have probably been made to believe that are inaccurate?
there's a lot that I can throw out there and say, maybe can we narrow that down to a specific topic or area, like in
Well,
general, maybe?
the flood, for example, the flood, as far as what that may have really been.
There's a lot of different places, a lot of direction that you could take that. Um, there is, and I know that within our educational system, there is this concept that is pushed onto the population that we are programmed with, that
Mhm.
there is absolutely no evidence whatsoever of any of the biblical stuff, not just the flood, but absolutely any of it. There's an attempt to discredit it 100% and just completely disregard it, right?
Mhm.
And it's presented as if that were fact, that there is no evidence whatsoever of any of it. Well, I studied, I am a religious studies major in college, and I took numerous biblical studies classes, several of which were biblical archaeology classes. And I can tell you that could not be further from the case. There is a ton of evidence that flat out verifies certain events that occurred and that are recorded in the scriptures. There is archaeological evidence of a lot of it. And even with something such as the biblical flood, there is a ton of evidence that points in that direction in almost every major discipline of science that we have. Whether you're talking about archaeology, anthropology, the geosciences, we have the sediment and fossil records, ice core samples, and it all starts to paint a picture that there was a time whenever there was a massive flood that swept across practically every continent on this planet. And one of the most powerful instances that I've been able to find in my research was an exploration of the Arctic that occurred. And I think this was in the 50s. I would have to go back and read up on that again. But a team of scientists were sent to investigate the Arctic regions. And they discovered immense fields, not just a small area, but immense fields where the megafauna of that area were all wiped out simultaneously. And it's not just that they've discovered the bones of these things, they have discovered woolly mammoths, flash frozen in
Mhm.
place with undigested vegetation still in their mouths. Equations have been ran to determine how quickly you would have to be frozen in order for the digestive juices and the acids of the mouth and stomach to have not been able to digest that food. And it is absolutely insane. It would have to be near instantaneous, with several hundred degrees below the point of freezing. And so not only was there a massive amount of water that washed over the Arctic region at this point, but it did so with terrible violence.
Mhm.
All of the megafauna, hundreds of them in these vast fields, jumbled together, twisted with massive trees, completely uprooted and turned upside down, as if the very earth was churned in a blender and then flash frozen. And it's not just there in this one isolated incident. It's all across the planet. We have several civilizations that I believe have been improperly dated in time. The South American great civilizations are a perfect example of that. If you look at somewhere like Sacsayhuaman or Pumapunku, any of these places where there is this incredible architecture and stonework with several 100-ton boulders. And the stone, in some instances, is diorite, the second hardest stone that we know that requires diamond to cut. And they're so carefully stacked and arranged that you cannot fit a single human hair in the joints. They did all of this without mortar, right? And archaeologists come along and they say, well, the Inca's been living here for, 800 years or whatever. And so it must be them that built it. But their legends say, we didn't build that. That was here before, and it was in ruins. We tried our best to try and rehab it, and we rebuilt on the foundations of this previous civilization. They've even got names for them, and they say they are the survivors of the Great Flood. And again, it's not just in this area. All across the planet, almost every indigenous peoples have some legend about this tremendous global flood that occurred. The Hopi have the same story. The indigenous peoples of Australia have a very similar story. And there is evidence everywhere that you want to look, but it is not presented as if that were the case, because not only would it necessitate us rewriting the entire history books if that were accepted, but what would it imply? If this was capable of happening in the past, who's to say it couldn't happen again in the future, right? And so these things are dismissed. Whenever you have a Ivy League trained geologist, such as Dr. Robert Schoch, pulled in to independently date the Sphinx enclosure, and he says there's absolutely no way. This is from 2500 BC. This must be at least 10,000 years old. Then what happens? Is his ideas accepted? No, he's laughed out of academia. There is an attempt to discredit him, and then there is an attempt to completely sabotage his entire career, even though he presented his findings to the annual gathering of, I can't remember the exact name of it, but it is essentially the top geologists in the field worldwide get together for a conference, and he presented his findings to them. And not only did they accept it, but they accepted it unanimously and said that there was no other way to read the data, that the Sphinx enclosure and the Sphinx itself had to be at least 10,000 years old, and likely was much older than that. But that's not in the history books, right? And if you mention this to Egyptologists, as an example, they will get irate. They will get up in arms, and you will be chased out of Egypt because they don't want to hear that. They don't want to hear that ancient Egypt might actually be the building site from the remnants of Atlantis 12,000 years ago, when this cycle occurred and the earth flooded and the continent of Atlantis broke up and sunk beneath the waves. And then the inhabitants dispersed across the planet, many of which going to the Americas, South and North America. And the high priest of Atlantis and his followers landed in the land of Kemet. And that's where they built what would become pre-dynastic Egypt. That's where the Great Pyramid came from. That's where the Sphinx came from. And all of those things were actually, according to Edgar Casey, they were built as monuments to this cycle, to the 12,000 year cycle as a whole, to warn humanity that these things could happen again. So that one of the biggest misconceptions, to answer your question 30 minutes later, is we have a tendency, because we are trained to do so, to accept the status quo from a very young age. And if you go back and look at the roots of our educational system, that's the purpose it was founded for. It wasn't to make a truly educated populace. It wasn't to pump out critical thinkers. It was to do the exact opposite of that, to create good factory workers who would do as they were told, who would submit to authority, and who would not ask too many questions, but rather swallow what they're given without question, right? And that's what mainstream educational systems are designed to do. And that is in no way an attack at educators or teachers. I know many. I have educators in my family, and many of them are near and dear to me. This is not something that the individual does or strives to do. But of course, we have some good teachers who can see through those things, right? And they leave enough of a breadcrumb trail for us to follow and to ask our own questions and eventually find our way to the truth. But ultimately, I think that's probably one of the biggest misconceptions we have, because it's programmed into us, is submitting to authority. Whenever Egyptologists say, oh no, the Great Pyramid is the tomb of a megalomaniac pharaoh, and there is proof that it is, and that it is no older, just accept it without digging deeper, because it's an authority figure, right? He is the head of Egyptology. He's studied this his entire life. He's got such and such alphabet letters attached to his name and title. Therefore, he must know better than me. I should just stop asking questions and accept it. That's hammered into our brains, right? Of course, a lot of us, especially Aquarians, tend to reject those notions, and by virtue of that energy, question things naturally. But yeah, we have this misconception that history is something that is written in stone, and that we know everything that there is to know, and that we are taught those things in school, and that there is nothing being left out, and that it is presented exactly as it happened. The unfortunate reality is we have and follow revisionist history. Whoever, if you're talking about war as an example, the winner of the war writes the history books, not the loser. So do you think you see the totality of what really happened, what led up to the war, the reasons behind the war and why it was fought? Probably not the most accurate picture, because you're only seeing one side of it, the side that the victors are writing into the history book. And it's not just with wars, it's that way with every single aspect of our history books. It should be challenged. That's why my personal motto is think for yourself, question authority with everything. If someone presents themselves as an authority figure, whether that's as a professor, as the head of Egyptology, or as the member of the clergy, a priest, they are saying, I am an authority figure, right? Therefore, don't question what I had to say, accept it with blind allegiance. All the more reason to question them, because there's motives hidden beyond that, right? That is the whole reason that if you go to a doctor's, as an example, they wear the white lab coats in most cases. It doesn't do anything for their job, right? It doesn't protect them. It doesn't add any convenience for them. It is an artifact of their profession that is there to signal to you, your psychology, that they are more important than you. They are an authority figure. They know what they're talking about. So if they tell you, hey, you should probably take this injection, then you don't question it. You accept it because that's what you're told to do. That was probably in the record books for the longest winded answer to a question ever. And I hope that some of that actually made sense to you guys. Honestly, I think I'll try to answer that question a little bit more directly, because this, I think, is important. One of the biggest misconceptions I think that we have in the spirituality community, and this one might strike a nerve for some of you. Hopefully it don't, right? But if it's truth, then it's truth. Mainstream spiritual circles as a whole, especially the ones at the top, the ones that have risen the ranks of spiritual content creation, as an example, present spiritual awakening as if there is some cookie cutter pattern that you must adhere to in your spiritual awakening journey, or it's not truly a spiritual awakening. This is what mine looked like. So this is what spiritual awakening looks like. And if you experience something other than that, you must not really be having a spiritual awakening. And it's probably not as pointed as all of that, but it illustrates the point that I'm trying to make. We are individuals, and I believe each and every single soul is an expression of divine frequency, a ray of the sun that is unique, that cannot be found anywhere else. Your energy, your signature, your vibration cannot be found anywhere else. It is a flavor of God, of the divine. And because of that, we're all different. We're all unique, right? And so to expect spiritual awakening to look the same across the board is very erroneous. My spiritual awakening process will certainly not be the exact same thing that you experience, because we're different. Our energies are different. Our lessons are different. Not all of you guys have the exact same childhood and background that I had, and I certainly didn't have yours, right? And the path is going to look different. It is tailored to the individual. So I hope none of you guys have experienced being discouraged because your experience in awakening has looked different from what is being presented by content creators or by talking heads, because I have encountered a lot of people who have experienced that. I've experienced that myself, and it's important to know your path is your own, and it doesn't need to look like anybody else's. This is a little bit off topic, but I want to share something with you guys because I think it will help illustrate my point. I grew up in foster care. Whenever I was, I think, 6, possibly 7 years old, my parents split up, and the environment and situation got bad fast. And me and my brothers were taken into state custody, and it initiated this cycle to where we would be taken from my parents and go into foster care, each time being placed in a different home, a different environment with completely different people, complete strangers, for several months, sometimes as much as a year. And then we'd go back to live with our parents, with my mother. And then it would last for a few months, and then this cycle would renew, and it would just be like this constant revolving door of in and out of foster care. And the result of that was every time I started to grow roots, they were snatched up. Every time I started to meet people and make friends, I moved to a different school district. Every time that I started to put down roots, I was supplanted. And this pattern continued from that very young age all of the way up until 16, whenever I was emancipated. And then later on in my young adult life, I continued the pattern myself without even realizing it. I changed jobs frequently. I moved a lot. I never really formed friendships. I didn't have any close friends or allies. I didn't have a town or a community that was home because I had moved frequently my entire life, right? And so now, if I go into the local convenience store at this small town that I live by, everybody knows everybody. They know their entire life's story, their history. They know what's going on with their family members. There is this camaraderie and community and closeness that I've never experienced. And because of that, I've always felt as if I were an outsider from the outside looking in. I've always felt like the black sheep, like I did not fit in society. And I've recently come to the understanding that maybe that was by design. Maybe that's not an accident. Maybe it's a reflection of who I am as a soul. As an example, And I'm not saying this is who I am. Okay, so don't misunderstand me. But if you consider the movie The Matrix, which, by the way, is a fantastic documentary that directly relates to this entire topic. In the movie The Matrix from 1999, Morpheus is an individual. His job is to operate outside of the Matrix. And he injects himself into the Matrix periodically to go and pull out certain people, to awaken them to the truth and to reality, and show them what reality really looks like for the first time. That's only possible for Morpheus to achieve because he operates independently of the Matrix. He's not a part of the system, right? He hasn't taken up roots in there. He's not bound to the confines of the system. So he's able to awaken other people. And I think that that is not too dissimilar from my own situation, because I have this multitude of experience going from home to home to home, being in a different religious environment with every single time, never really putting down roots, never really accepting a place and a role within the system. I think that's why, because now I have the ability to not be bound to the system, and I can come and go freely and hopefully help to awaken people. At least that's the goal. But yes, to your point, we've all got different roles. We've all got very different paths, and it's that way by design. So don't ever allow yourself to be pressed into somebody else's different shape, right? We're all here to walk our own path, not to try to walk somebody else's path because we're told that's what spiritually awakening looks like. All right. Does anybody have any other questions or any other directions that we should explore? What about you, Casey?
Now you can hear me.
Yes, I can hear you now.
I got a little discombobulated because my computer shut down. No, you covered things. I really am itching to go deeper, but I know that we're going to do that tomorrow with the members and on your Patreon. But because some of the things you were bringing up, for example, Atlantis, that was something that was found in some of these drops that have come out.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and I didn't want to. I have to talk to you offline about it, but yeah, I was going to mention it, and I was like, I better not say that here. But yeah, it is something that came up, especially with the location of where this island was, and a role that Maxwell played. That was something that came through in these files, being bombarded by dogs.
Well, I might not be sleeping a whole lot tonight because
Yeah,
I'm going to have to dive into that.
Absolutely. You guys be sure to check Brian out. He's got his own YouTube channel. Brian, do you want to give like your Substack, so to speak, or all your
Yeah, absolutely. I always forget that, and I'm glad that you mentioned it. So if any of you guys want to get more involved with my work, if you want to be a part of my content, the easiest way to get involved is at my website, magirising.com. And the reason for that is it is designed as a hub. There is a lot of good free stuff there for you guys to partake in. I have a document titled The Research Compendium that is free to access and download, that contains every single bit of research that I have gathered over the last 20 years. And most, if not all of this, is from the scientific literature. And so it doesn't read like a book, right? But if you want to do your own research, and I do always recommend you guys doing that, that is an excellent place to start. Also, I have a dashboard that I've created on the website called Geodata. There's a link at the very top of the page. If you click on that, there is a real-time feed for every single monitoring station on the planet. whether you're talking about what's going on with the sun, the magnetosphere, volcanoes, earthquakes, the Schumann resonance, the whole 9 yards. It's all there, all together in one place, and it's 100% free. Also, on the website, directly under my profile picture of my logo, there's a line of social media icons. If you click on any one of those, it will take you directly to my page. I'm on TikTok, I'm on YouTube, of course, and now I'm beginning a Patreon account for anybody who's interested in the deep dives. If anyone is interested in participating in the speech, the conversation, and the truths that don't have to be filtered. I have not spoke freely, openly, and unfiltered on social media for a reason, because I don't want to get canceled and I don't want to be shut down. Patreon allows me to discuss the topics I can't discuss anywhere else without mincing words. So if you want to be a part of that, it's on my Patreon account, which it's Magi Rising for all of them, whether it's TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, Patreon, Magi Rising. There's links on my YouTube channel that will take you directly to the Patreon if that makes it easier.
Wonderful. Brian, as always, we appreciate you. You're a wealth of knowledge. And we always enjoy these dialogues with you. So I'm being beckoned.
Well, thank you very much for having me, and I appreciate each and every one of you participating in this conversation and helping to share this information out to the world.
Absolutely, it's always a pleasure. Yeah, we'll be live tomorrow, but we'll be on the member side, and we'll have to talk before then because I want to bring up some of the stuff that I was mentioning, and we appreciate everybody coming in and being part of this conversation and listening and your questions. Next time, bring more questions, open your minds, and we'll go deeper into it. Brian, thank you.
Awesome. Thank you for having me. I will see you all tomorrow. Hopefully.
All right. Take care.